What is the state of the theater in the Arab world right now?
Yeah, it's a very complex question, I must say. Yeah, it looks simple, but very complex. Yeah, I mean, that's the point. It's the post-colony, I would say. So we got theater since the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt onwards. So it's like, exactly 1848 was the first theater performance in the Arab world in Lebanon. That was in Beirut. It was an adaptation of The Miser, done in a little theater, which is actually, a family house of Maroun Naqash, who is the first pioneering figure of theater. But in fact, 1848, 47, 48 onwards, what we got is that, we had like a theater tradition that is very much new in the Arab world, but we had like a coexistence of different epistemic traditions. In other words, the coexistence of the classical, neoclassical, modernist, as well as postmodernist. So we have all these coming together at the same time. And of course, in one single temporality, which means very simply that it's really problematic speaking about what kind of avant-garde theater we have, what kind of traditional theater we have. In the 1960s, with the beginning or with the calls for independence, etc., and post-colonial, zeal and all this, we had this call, which is very much similar to Frantz Fanon's call of, getting rid of the European game and let's find something new, which is going back to, for the theater people, going back to the halqa, the hakawat, and other traditions that pre-existed, the theater in the Western sense. So we had this goal, which is a retrieval of tradition, and that was going on from the 60s up till 70s, I would say, 80s. And then theater people, they realized that, wait a minute, what we are doing is that we are folklorizing our performance cultures. So there is no way back to an original whatever, halqa, for example, as such. It's not really an authentic performance tradition that should be imitated, because it has been all the time at the crossroads of different histories and different cultures, etc. So, this is a call that was very much problematic. It was part of the post-colonial trope, but it was very much problematic. After that, maybe after 67 onwards, people realized that we need to refashion and renew the question of going back to the roots, authenticity, pan-Arabism, pan-Islamism, and things like this. So, and we have also a different, I would say, tradition coming out from, or maybe parallel to the avant-gardist theater forms in the West. So we have this post-dramatic modes and many other forms of theater. So brief, what I'm trying to say here is that there is a tension between different theatrical traditions in the Arab world, and this tension is exactly the same tension that is happening elsewhere in the world. So here, for example, you have the classical, neoclassical, modernist, and postmodernist. The neoclassical is still going on and on. You go to Broadway and you see Chekhov still performed for 50 years, the Three Sisters or whatever. It's the same tradition in the Arab world. The Arab world, we had this coexistence of classical, neoclassical, and modernist, but with certain, degrees of differences, I would say, from here, because our modernity is a post-colonial modernity. In other words, in Europe and America, maybe we are not talking about, a theater that was transplanted into your culture by the colonial enterprise. And that's our case. In other words, we didn't have a theater tradition before. We had performances, we had performance cultures, but not a tradition proper, like the buildings, for example, and texts and things like this. And we can elaborate a conversation about this. But with the coming of the colonizer, we came to contact with the, the Western, I would say, theater tradition. But of course, then it was very problematic. Why is that? Simply because, we came into contact with the Western theater, but through the colonial enterprise. And that was a little bit problematic, as I said, in the early 60s. That's why, we couldn't help developing a kind of post-colonial resistance that you can feel in the plays that I was talking about. Adopting the master model, but at the same time resisting, the supremacy of the model, resisting, it's like the Prospero-Caliban relationship, So I remember one of the statements of Caliban telling Prospero, his master, you taught me English, you taught me language, you taught me how to curse, so now I'm cursing you. So that's exactly what happened, So taking Shakespeare, for example, taking Molière, and of course refashioning the text in order to write back. That was an option. But after that, then we realized that the enemy is not all the time outside, but it's inside. So we came again and we embarked on a whole enterprise of self-critique, etc. So that's why I ended up my conversation with the double border thinking and double critique. Border thinking is Mignolo's, I would say, development of the kind of, resistance to the coloniality of power. Because colonialism is over in our part of the world with the departure of the French colonialism. But the coloniality of power is still there. It's dominant in other forms. And that's why it requires a new kind of resistance, which is delinking and border thinking, etc. And many people are trying to do that in theater and practicing theater, like in the example of Nabil Hlu or the example of Al-Bassam Al-Hamid Summit. That's the best example of the thinking and creating across borders between East and West and dancing over hyphens. This is the kind of modernity I'm trying to speak about.
Professor Amine, we have an online question. One of our viewers who is watching the live stream has sent this in, and this question comes from Dr. Linda Morrison, one of our faculty members at UNE. And it reads as follows. Thank you for your interesting lecture. I'm wondering how you think the issues of gender, endemic to many of Shakespeare's plays, are received by both women and men in the Arab world. I find it interesting in your analysis that you didn't really speak to the issues of gender, gender relationships, and relational power. And specifically, I'm interested in how Arab men and women might see these issues differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gender issues are extremely important. But my concern, it was very much a selective, gallery of plays. Of course, there are other plays that very much are outspoken on the subject of gender, but I didn't mention them here because of the short time. I was much more concerned with the question of race, ethnicity, much more than gender when it comes to Othello, for example. But when it comes to Hamlet, I was much more concerned with the Hamletizing, which is the status of the identity crisis in the Arab world, particularly after '67. So, yeah, the gender issue, it's right there. It's very fundamental, but of course, I was tuned with other issues. I'm sorry.
My question was, in terms of the kind of theater that ordinary citizens across the Arabic diaspora would be exposed to or have access to, how would you say that the growth of Wahhabism and other forms of institutionalized fundamentalism have had an impact on this kind of access to, just people living their everyday lives throughout the Arabic world?
Well, yeah, inside the Arab world, I must say that, there is less impact, at least in Morocco, there is less impact of Wahhabism in, the cultural life and the artistic life. I mean, we have quite a vibrant, artistic life in Morocco, and the performance scene is so vibrant. So we have a theatrical tradition that is very powerful, and we have a performance and installation and painting and other things. So we have this, and besides this, of course, we have discourses on Wahhabism. From the very beginning of Moroccan theater and the Arab theater in general, we had this conflictual interference between those religious people who are defending theater and others who are attacking theater. So many religious people and scholars, and very famous scholars, I would say, that they were defending theater at the very beginning in Morocco. In Morocco, theater started as a theater of resistance. It was appropriated and adopted by the nationalist movement. At the beginning, it was put on in schools, and many theater people and theater figures, they were part of the Salafi reformist, movement. Having said that, we have many introductions to plays by Muslim scholars, not Orthodox scholars, but Muslim, very much open scholars. And on the other hand, we had a fatwa, a very famous fatwa and very famous book, قامة الدليل على حرمة التمثيل, which is written by one of the Tanjawi scholars, of course, in the early 40s, completely denouncing theater activity and putting, like 43 reasons and for that, etc. But still, as I said, it was coexisting. We have this opinion, we have the other opinion, and we have a theatrical activity that was flowing and going on and on and on, and it never stopped because of any kind of orthodox whatever. And having said that, I must say that in the Arab world we have quite a vibrant scene, in Carthage, the Journée de Carthage, in the Cairo Experimental Theater. So we have so much powerful performances, so daring performances sometimes, It's true that we still have problems with performing the body, particularly the feminine body, talking about feminist issues here. We still have problems with nudeness on stage, but I must say that, there is quite a very interesting and vibrant scene.
Well, if I can follow up on that question to be a little bit more specific, is there any theatrical tradition or theater, modern theater, in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I'm, just recently, like 2 months ago, I'm called by a friend of mine who is the director of the National Theater in Saudi Arabia to be one of the advisors of that institution, which means that with the new, order and the new political strategy of openness in Saudi Arabia, they are trying to implement something, bigger and something like it's beginning. I would say there is the beginning of something very interesting. Now, of course, they are opening up, cinemas and inviting singers, to put on concerts, etc. It's still very slow, but it's going on and it's taking shape. And I'm sure that in the future, in the next, I would say, upcoming 10 10 years, we will see more of, and of course there are many theater companies who are performing. Yeah, they were having serious difficulties to perform in specific venues in Central, but we see them in festivals, we see them everywhere, and they have quite a very interesting, I would say, body of, theater people, scholars, playwrights, etc. All what they needed is this release of a new policy, and it's done, it's going, it's taking shape, it's developing. Maybe with the new prince, hopefully there will be something here.
To return to Shakespeare's plays, although a lot of the conflict in Othello is obvious, a play, one of his historic plays, his three plays, Julius Caesar, deals with tensions, not only sexual, but racial, cultural, national tensions. How is that dealt with at all in the Arab world, and how do they deal with it, if they do?
Yeah, I remember a few productions dealing with Julius Caesar, but the productions I was talking about, why Othello and Hamlet, these are the most prominent. And the Richard III as well, very recently, it was the most powerful Richard III I saw in Tunisia. It was immediately after the Jasmine Revolution. And the leitmotif was like, so that, this won't happen again. So that was, so that we won't have a new Richard III again. So that was the idea. And Julius Caesar, yes, there are many similarities. I'm sure that there are few. I remember there are few productions dealing with Julius Caesar, particularly Busra Hanzitoni in Morocco, who staged this 3 years ago. But digging into the history of Hamlet and Othello, it's a different business. And why is that? Simply because, Othello, as I said, it's already offering this background, for the Arabs and opening up, their appetites to write back. Remember that we are all Moors, and we felt like, it's not fair the way Othello was treated or portrayed in Central. And the Hamlet, state of dilemma, it's really what's happening in the Arab world. And the inability of fixing the word out of joint, that's exactly what happened in the Arab world and what is still going on. Because, the Arab world is one of the most, I would say, conflictual zones in the globe, very simply.
Another interesting question. Anybody? What is your favorite Shakespearean play?
Hamlet,
All right. Thank you so much, Khalid. It was a great evening.
لما وجهك مسود؟
إنه السفلس ماما. لقد عاشرت كثيرا من العاهرات اليوم.
أتمزح؟
أبدا، العاهرات اليوم أكثر مما كنا أيام والدي. عليك أن تخرجي إلى الشارع ماما وتري البيوت المضاءة بالنيون. مواخير مواخير.
أهلا بعودتك مولاي هاملت. يؤسفني موت والدي، عظم الله أجرك.
عظم الله إضاءتك ومغيرك.
مولاي.
لا يا أرتس، أقدر لك ذلك. لقد كان أبوك مواليا جدا لوالدي، وإني أعتمد اعتمادا كاملا على إخلاصك التام لنهجنا.
إن صاحب الرهبة والعظمة القائد العظيم للقوات المسلحة، قائد الجو والبر والبحر، الرئيس المنتخب لمجلس النبلاء، يلفت انتباهكم أيها السادة إلى أن الجلسة قد بدأت. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بموجب مرسوم مني تم زرع 10,000 نخلة وافتتاح حديقتين عامتين تخليدا لذكرى أخي. إن وقت العزاء قد انتهى.
So, Al-Bassam's use of media technologies is meant to critically reflect on our mediatized culture in an attempt to deconstruct the staging of reality by the reality of staging, especially during war times. The intervention of different media, as we have seen in Al-Bassam's stage, creates a tension in the perception of the physical body of the speaker, the performer on stage, and her or his own two-dimensional representations on the screen and, of course, the stage. The simultaneous virtualized representation of on-stage performer on the screen in the first scene creates the illusion of the performer and his or her own avatar. So the performance then functions as a form of political satire, providing a more embodied relationship with the war on terror, the axis of evil, the Qaeda, Al Jazeera, etc. The birth of the infiltrated sectarian violence, invasions of foreign armies, etc. All these, according to Al-Bassam, from a layering of digital documentation with the performance, a mise en abîme of contemporary Arab conditions is realized. Al-Bassam's archive fever is enacted through his very own words, quote, "But the conditions of creation and the radical violence of the world around me at the time of writing imparted a second, more urgent and highly contemporary, I would say, prerogative for these plays." So Al-Bassam's English version of Al-Hamlet Summit employs an English with strong Arabic undertones that are residual. Therefore, we can say that these dramatic words or transplantations establish new relations with English and Arabic and other languages. So as if when he's delivering the text into English, you feel like, you can read in between the lines an Arabic that is underwritten right there. So to conclude, recent Shakespeare productions on Arab stages challenge us with pending questions and problematics. What is the task of theater in the era of globalization, marked by the coloniality of power? Is there still a global divide between affluent countries and rich ones as far as theater practice is concerned? and questions of modernity, etc., or even post-modernity. How far our global, local culture, theatre cultures, inflected by what Walter Mignolo would call global designs, and how can we engage in a kind of epistemological, disciplinary disobedience and bring to the fore the existential experience of dwelling on the border. So Al-Bassam's Arab Shakespeare trilogy, for example, pushes these lines of questioning to their extreme, with a particular focus on dancing over hyphens, or dancing on the hyphen, between East and West. And of course, this involves a kind of bolder thinking, or very simply a double critique, if we want to put it in Khatibi's terms, as forms of interweaving. So the hyphen here is often used to link and de-link at the same time, alternatives, or words denoting or describing a dual function. It connects but also disconnects, unites and separates, consents and contests. The hyphen in Al-Bassam's theatre connects and at the same time instigates kind of contest with regard not only to theatre language but also identity politics. The hyphen also implies a fundamental interference between different languages and modalities and allows the dancer to tap into the epistemic potential of new ways of inhabiting the world. Third, dwelling on the borders between East and West, Semitism and Latinity. Such hyphen also highlights what Khatibi calls an entretien abîme, which is a kind of dialogue and the practice of permanent translation. Even Sabab Theatre Company, Al-Bassam Theatre Company, resists fixity because it's a company that belongs to nowhere. Its place, maybe it's based in Kuwait, but also in England and other parts. Despite perhaps because of the never maintaining a fixed address, as he claims, was able to work across national, linguistic, and cultural boundaries in a free and independent way. Thus, recent Arab Shakespeare is mobilized as a catalyst producing a countertext. Shakespeare's text is no longer the issue, but what will come out from it is the matter. Thank you.